The desert doesn't lie. That's what the old hand said, the ones who'd spent enough time in Helmand province to know the difference between silence and the kind of silence that means something is coming. On the morning of March 14, 2011, the silence was the second kind. It pressed down across Firebase Kilo 7 like a held breath, like the moment before a detonation when the air itself seems to understand what's about to happen. 540 Marines from the 3rd Battalion, 7th Regiment were dug into the eastern slope of a valley that had no name on any map the Pentagon had approved. They had been there for 6 days. By the time anyone in Kandahar realized the extraction corridor had been compromised, they would be there for 1 day more, and whether they survived that day would depend entirely on a woman the squadron had spent 2 years pretending didn't exist. Her name was First Lieutenant Adiz Akafur, call sign Ironwood. She was 31 years old. She had grown up in Enugu, Nigeria, moved to Atlanta at 13, learned to fly at 16 in a 2-seat Cessna above red Georgia clay, and commissioned through ROTC at 22 with a fitness report that described her as technically exceptional, socially difficult. The socially difficult part was code. Every woman who'd ever been told to smile more in a briefing room knew exactly what it meant. She had deployed twice before this, once to Iraq in 2007 where she'd logged 43 combat flight hours, once to the Horn of Africa where she'd extracted a special forces team from a compound that wasn't supposed to exist. Both times her performance reviews had used the word adequate. Both times the men she'd pulled out of the fire had quietly stopped using that word when they thought the brass wasn't listening. She was seated in the ready room at Fob Dwyer when the first distress call came in. Not because she'd been assigned the alert rotation, she hadn't. She was there because she couldn't sleep, and because the coffee in the ready room was marginally better than the coffee in the barracks, and because she had a habit, one her mother had given her, of being in the right place without knowing why. She was reading a worn copy of Things Fall Apart, the irony of which she would not appreciate until much later, when the radio crackled and a voice she didn't recognize said the words that would change everything. All stations, Kilo 7 is black on ammo, black on medevac, we have 140 plus casualties, we are requesting immediate close air support, any station, please. The room was empty except for her. The duty officer was at chow, the operations sergeant was in the latrine. Adiz Akafur set down her book, walked to the radio, and keyed the handset. Kilo 7, this is Ironwood, send your grid. The grid that came back was wrong. Not wrong in the way coordinates sometimes drift from a soldier's shaking hands, wrong in the way that told her whoever was transmitting had either been wounded badly enough to transpose digits or was transmitting under direct fire. She ran the numbers twice. The second time confirmed what the first time had suggested. The 3-7 wasn't where anyone thought it was. They were 4 kilometers east of the registered extraction point, which meant they were 4 kilometers deeper into a valley where 3 separate intelligence reports had noted significant Taliban mortar positioning in the preceding 72 hours. She pulled the sectional map from the cabinet above the radio console. Paper, she still preferred paper. The digital overlays on the mission planning terminal showed you what the system wanted you to see. Paper showed you the land. She traced the ridgeline with her finger, then she traced it again. There was a draw, a shallow depression running northeast to southwest that the official approach corridor didn't account for. If the Taliban had moved tube artillery into that draw in the last 48 hours, any aircraft coming in from the approved vector would be flying directly into its beaten zone. The approved corridor wasn't a route, it was a kill box. She keyed the radio again. Kilo 7 Ironwood, confirm, are you receiving indirect fire from your northwest? A pause, static, then, affirm northwest and northeast, we are surrounded on 3 sides, 6 o'clock is a cliff, we have nowhere to go. She was already moving toward the flight line. The duty officer caught her at the door to the armory, a captain named Brindley who had the specific energy of a man whose career had never been seriously threatened. He looked at her flight gear, he looked at her face. He said, Akafur, who authorized a sortie? She said, I'm going to pull your people out of that valley, sir. You don't have a wingman, you don't have a tasking order, you don't have. I have fuel and I have ordnance and I have a grid, she said. And with respect, sir, we have about 11 minutes before that window closes. He stared at her. There was a long tradition in that stare, a tradition of making women prove the same things twice that men were allowed to prove once. She let him have the stare. She had learned a long time ago not to flinch. I will have you court-martialed, he said. Yes, sir, she said, after. She was airborne in 8 minutes. The AV-8B Harrier climbed into a sky the color of old bone, the desert floor dropping away beneath her like a problem she had already solved. At altitude, she could see the smoke from Kilo 7's position, 3 distinct columns, gray and brown, bending west in the morning wind. She counted them the way her father had taught her to count things that mattered, deliberately without rushing because the number was going to mean something. 3 columns, 3 fires, that was more than a firefight, that was a massacre in progress. She rolled inverted and dove. The Marines on the ground heard her before they saw her. That was how it always worked with close air support. The sound arrived first, a low tearing pressure across the sky that the brain couldn't quite categorize as mechanical, something between thunder and intention. Lance Corporal Tomas Reinhold, 20 years old, bleeding from a shrapnel wound above his left eye, was pressed against a low mud brick wall when the sound reached him. He looked up. The Harrier came over the ridgeline at approximately 400 knots and 300 feet, and the blast of its passage blew the dust off the top of the wall like a table being cleared. Holy, he started, he didn't finish. Aircraft, aircraft, someone was screaming on the net. Friendly aircraft, break left, there's a mortar position at. Adiz had already seen it. The mortar pit was dug into the south face of the draw, exactly where her paper map had suggested it might be. 2 crew, a third figure running toward what looked like a secondary position. She rolled right, acquired, and released a pair of Mk-82s in a ripple pattern that walked directly through the pit and carried the secondary position apart in a gray-orange spray of dust and fragmented steel. The radio erupted. Splash, splash, target destroyed. Ironwood, be advised you are receiving small arms from the northeast treeline, approximately 300 meters, danger close. Copy, danger close, she said. Her voice was level. Mark your position. We have no smoke left. Then get small and stay small. She was already on the turn, pulling 4 Gs through a left bank that pressed her into the seat with a weight her body had learned to accommodate over years of practice. The treeline was visible, a ragged line of scrub and poplar that didn't belong to the valley's natural geometry, too deliberate, too even. Someone had planted it or used it for exactly this purpose. She came in from the north below the expected threat axis, which meant she was below the expected fire. The 25 gun opened up at 200 meters from the treeline, and she walked the burst northeast to southwest in a single sustained depression of the trigger that lasted 3 seconds and felt considerably longer. The treeline came apart in sections, the way things came apart under sustained cannon fire, not all at once, but in a sequence of destruction that had its own terrible momentum. Then silence or near enough. Ironwood, this is Kilo 7 actual. The voice on the radio was different now. Older, measured, the battalion commander, she realized, Colonel Fenwick Adair. She had met him once at a briefing at Camp Leatherneck where he had not looked at her directly. We count approximately 40 personnel still active. We have 120 casualties requiring immediate evac. What is your fuel state? Bingo in 40 minutes, she said. Can you keep the LZ clear for hellos? That's why I'm here, sir. A pause, something moved in it, not static, not interference, something human. What's your name, pilot? Ironwood, she said, just Ironwood for now. The helicopters came in 2 waves, 4 CH-53E Super Stallions in the first, 3 more in the second, escorted by a pair of Cobras that had finally gotten their tasking orders sorted out at Kandahar and arrived 37 minutes after Adiz had already cleared the primary threat. She watched them from above, circling at altitude, the sun now fully risen and turning the valley floor to hammered copper. Below her, the Marines were moving in organized streams toward the landing zones, carrying their wounded in firemen's carries and improvised litters made from field jackets and rifle stocks. She counted the figures as they moved. She always counted. The radio channels were full now. Kandahar Ops, the Hello flight leads, the battalion's fires net, someone at Fob Dwyer trying to raise her on a frequency she'd stopped monitoring 20 minutes ago because she knew exactly who it was and what he would say. She would deal with Captain Brindley when she landed. She would deal with all of it when she landed. Right now her job was to maintain eyes on the valley and report anything that moved below her that wasn't supposed to. Something moved. Eastern ridgeline, she almost missed it, a flicker at the edge of the terrain feature, a shape that didn't resolve cleanly against the rock. She dropped her nose and descended to get a better angle, pulling the Harrier's FLIR image onto her secondary display. 2 figures, carrying what appeared to be a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile, and they were tracking the descending Super Stallions, not her. She had perhaps 10 seconds. All Hello elements break north immediately. MANPAD threat Eastern Ridge, break north. She didn't wait to see if they complied. She rolled inverted, acquired the 2 figures in her heads-up display, and strafed the ridgeline in a single pass so close to the rock that the Harriers winked it past within what her instruments told her was 40 feet of the terrain. The 2 figures disappeared into the dust of the cannon burst. She pulled up hard, the G-meter peaking at 6.4, and hauled the nose back to level flight. Her hands were shaking. They had been shaking since the second pass. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone. The Super Stallions broke north. The MANPAD threat was gone. The evacuation continued. Below her in the Copper Valley, the last of the Marines were boarding. A single figure she couldn't tell rank at this distance paused at the ramp of the final helicopter and looked up. Looked up at the circling Harrier, at the small gray aircraft that had been there when no one else had been there. The figure stood like that for what her instruments told her was 4 seconds. Then they went aboard and the helicopter lifted. She was alone above the valley. The smoke from the morning's fires had thinned to almost nothing. The ridgelines were quiet. The sky was very blue. She turned north toward Dwyer and started running her fuel numbers. The debrief lasted 4 hours. She knew it would be long before it started. There were too many people in the room who needed the narrative to be something other than what it was, and those people tended to talk more not less when the facts were inconvenient. Captain Brindley was there. 2 JAG officers were there. A colonel from Kandahar Ops she'd never met sat at the far end of the table and made notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting she couldn't read from her angle. They went through it in sequence. The unauthorized departure, the absence of a tasking order, the absence of a wingman, the danger close engagement at Kilo 7, the decision to engage the MANPAD position on the eastern ridge without a positive hostile fire declaration from ground forces. She answered each question the same way, with the facts in the order they had occurred, without embellishment and without apology. She had made each decision in the moment that required a decision. She would make the same decisions again. She did not say that last part out loud, but she let them see it in the way she sat straight, still, not performing patience but actually possessing it. Brindley said at one point, "You put this entire squadron's operational certification at risk with a unilateral." "I put 540 lives above a paperwork process," she said. The room went quiet. "That's not your call to make," Brindley said. "With respect, sir, someone had to make it." The colonel at the end of the table looked up from his yellow pad. He was studying her in the way people sometimes studied things they hadn't expected to encounter, not hostility, but recalibration. She had seen that look before. It was the beginning of something, though she had learned not to trust what it might be the beginning of. The JAG officers recommended a formal investigation. The investigation was opened 3 days later. It would run for 6 weeks, interview 41 witnesses, review 6 hours of cockpit video, and ultimately produce a 200-page report that found no violation of the laws of armed conflict, noted the MANPAD engagement as consistent with established rules of engagement given the immediate threat to non-combatant aircraft, and characterized the unauthorized sortie as an unsanctioned but operationally critical intervention. It would not use the word heroic. The people who wrote reports like that rarely did. But on the 3rd page, in language that was careful and precise and almost entirely drained of feeling, there was a sentence that read, "The actions of First Lieutenant Ockafer directly prevented the loss of the evacuation element and preserved the lives of all surviving personnel of 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines." She read it in her bunk alone at 200. Then she folded the report and put it in her kit bag. Then she lay back and stared at the ceiling of the hooch and listened to the desert outside, the particular silence of Helmand at night, which was different from every other silence she'd known, older and flatter and completely indifferent to anything a human being might want from it. She thought about the figure on the helicopter ramp, the one who had stopped and looked up. She didn't know who it was. She would not know for another 18 months. Colonel Fenwick Adair had been in the Marine Corps for 26 years by the time of Kilo 7. He was not a sentimental man. Sentimentality and infantry command coexisted badly, and he had learned early to separate the two, to feel what there was to feel in private, in silence, in the space between duty and rest where